Welcome to Smith Weekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of Smith Weekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at Smith Weekly, including Paul M., Jared W., Luke A., and Ryan S. On the program today is a new guest, Simon Ridgway, founder of Gold Group Management, a junior natural resource group, is with us. Gold Group Management houses three listed juniors: an Explorer, Radius Gold, which has a focus in Mexico and Guatemala; Volcanic Gold Mines, a Guatemala-focused exploration company; and Rackla Metals, a Yukon and Northwest Territories explorer. You can learn more about Gold Group Management and Simon and the respective companies by visiting goldgroup.com. Mr. Ridgway, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm good, Andrew. How are you? Thanks for the invite. Happy to be here.
It's good to catch up finally and get you on the program. And thanks to our mutual friend, Adam Buchanan, which was able to get this set up. This is an introduction program, Simon, so pretty straightforward. We've got a few things to run through here and talk just briefly about what you do in the business and your experience. And why don't we first just kick it off here by your views on the market here? Quite a choppy, really 5 years for this natural resource market, bull market, if you will. Been pretty choppy and sideways, and it looks like we're at a pretty interesting point here in 2023. Where do you think capital starts to flow into this sector heavy? And do you think good sentiment returns to the junior sector specifically? What are your thoughts and outlook here in 2023?
I think the year started well. I'm pretty optimistic that capital will start flowing in this year, but I've been thinking that for the last couple of years and been wrong the last two. So I like exploration, and I think if you've had good success, you can always find the capital for a good project. But it has certainly been a choppy 5 years or more.
You guys are focused predominantly gold and other areas of the market, but do you have a view on gold here? And as an explorationist, maybe we can tie this in with your experience a bit, having discovered some interesting projects over the years. And of course, the exploration business is quite challenging because there's obviously a lot of failures and projects that just don't reach the economic bar that's needed. But maybe just talk a bit about your experience and your thoughts on gold and tie all that together for us.
Well, I'll just give a bit of history. In the early 70s, I began back in the days of the hippie days, I began traveling around the world, and I somehow I always wanted to go to the Yukon Territory. So in about 76, 77, I found myself, I got across on the American continent and drifted up into the Yukon. But once arriving there, the place is like 3 times the size of England, and there were 2 roads through the territory. So after being there a few days, I was wondering, how am I going to get to see this place? And luckily, I bumped into some people who were going off to do a job with line cutting up in a project that's actually a mine at the moment, the Virginia mine up in Dawson City and just south of Dawson. And so I went up and got a job there cutting line in the woods for, going there for 30 days and come out and get paid. And I think the first time I got paid from doing that work, they put more money in my hand than I'd ever had before. So I spent, the next 10 years kind of doing that, working in the bush in the Yukon Territory and Alaska in the summers, and then in the winters down on the beaches of Mexico or other Latin American countries. But somewhere in the middle of there, I learned how to prospect, got the gold bug and in Dawson City and began, prospecting and vending my prospects to public companies from Vancouver, and then at some point began running companies myself. The first company I listed was called Tombstone Explorations, based upon a rock suite that I'm back working in at the moment. So we'll go full circle. But Tombstone was listed in about 1991, and I took it. The biggest investor in it was a guy called Vern Hall, he wanted me to move to Venezuela, where he knew there was a lot of gold. So 91, I listed Tombstone and then took it to Venezuela. And sort of since then, I've been working for the most part in Latin America, exploring for gold, sometimes silver, other minerals, but for the most part, my focus has always been gold. Like I said, I got the gold bug back in those days. So Since then, I would say now that's 40 years or so of exploring and running public companies. I've never really tried to predict the gold price. You really need to find a project that's economic at the time of the gold. So trying to pick the right time to be in exploration for gold is a bit difficult. So I really never understood the market as much. I read a lot of other papers, a lot of from other people that do predict the gold price. But I must admit, presently, here we are, 2023, and it feels good. It feels like we're going to get a strong gold market over the next few months. So let's see what happens. But at 1900 gold, I think companies should be able to make money.
Certainly, if the projects are good and the G&A is kept at a reasonable area, plus obviously escalations that we've witnessed over the last 2 years in the sector, and some of these CapExes, significant increases, et cetera.
Yeah,
Simon,
that's correct. But more of a challenge than the gold price right now is the politics all over the world, right? I mean, it's especially Latin America, no matter what country you go to. So just to back up a little, I found with Jorge Ganoso, I founded Fortuna Silver Mines, and Fortuna is a gold producer. It's got a mine in Argentina, it's got one in Mexico, one in Peru, and then it moved to Africa about a year ago. I resigned about 6 or 7 months ago just to get back into what I love, which is the early stage exploration. But I'm just looking at, Fortuna's challenges of producing gold in Argentina and Peru and Mexico, and certainly in Latin America, the politics has got very, very difficult. So more important than the gold price is where you find your mine, right? Where to explore.
well, you know what? Hard times, we've seen this before. We've seen these political cycles too. Hard times will shape you up, sober you up to the reality of what mining and natural resources provides in terms of wealth to every country, whether you're an advanced nation or, well, I wouldn't even say advanced. Let's just say you're further along the life cycle in some
Right,
cases of Western
right.
nations, and early stage development in some of these other countries who can use that wealth as well. And you can't replace it. Unfortunately, it's not a replaceable thing. Once that reality comes in, which is probably through hard times, sadly, when that reality comes in, you'll see policies start to go the other direction.
Yeah.
Have that.
I mean, I spent a lot of time over the last, 10 or 12 years in Central America. And as you say, you would think that those countries, Guatemala, Honduras, would want to see development so they can create employment and stop having the caravans of people drifting up out of, people leaving home, fathers, children, sons leaving home to get work, back up in the USA because they can't find work in their own country. As you read the newspapers, I always talk about it's the violence that drives people in these caravans. It isn't. It's a lack of employment in the countries that does it, the lack of opportunity for them. They want a better life and they just can't get it in their own countries because the politics does not change.
No, I agree with that. And it's quite a challenging environment. And fortunately, you have inexperienced people that come in and don't know what they're doing with respect to government. And as you know, private sector attracts a lot of talent, Simon. And quite frankly, the government, well, I would say it's second tier talent, sadly, but that's typically what's gravitated.
I would have to agree with that. I
But
would have to agree with that.
let's move on here. Let's talk about just how about a brief overview of Gold Group management? This is kind of an umbrella structure where it oversees a few other companies under the group. Talk about that structure. We've seen similar structures. Maybe there's some benefits to it. We've seen the Lumina Group out there. We've seen Oxygen Capital, Hunter Dickinson, and others. Have these type of structures. But talk about Gold Group and what the focus is a bit, and then we'll dive into some of the companies.
Yeah. Well, I started Gold Group. I initially, as I said earlier, started Tombstone Exploration. That I took that to Venezuela. It was quite successful. But as a prospector, which I learned to do in the Yukon, flying, every quarter I'd fly up from Venezuela across Central America and see all those volcanoes and rocks. And really, it's very hard to prospect in these tropical terrains like Venezuela, where it's all saprolite. So, as I flew over those hills, I always wanted to get back to hard rock again. So when I left, Tombstone was quite successful. Company raised quite a lot of money, picked up some very good prospects in that Venezuelan gold rush. And at some point I left and came back to Vancouver, took over a shell and basically took that company to Honduras, back into those volcanoes I've been flying over, or those hard rocks, and began prospecting there. I've been very lucky. I had some good success in Honduras. We found a mine called the San Martin. in basically a hot spring gold deposit, about 1 million ounces. So I took that company and then made the discovery, sold it to Glamis Gold, and I came back to Vancouver and formed another company, a new company called Radius Gold, which we're still in the group, and went back to Central America again where I'd had the success. But as I did that, people, I had some good success, and so got a bit of a reputation. People would bring me ideas, or geos would. So I would kind of grubstake them to go find things, right? They would come to me with a concept, I would finance it, they'd go out and do it. One of those was Fortuna, a geologist that worked for me called Oi Ganosa, came with an idea to start a silver company. So I grubstaked him, and we about a year and a half, we come up with a project in Peru. So at that point, I decided that running an organization where you need CFOs and corporate secretary and secretaries, and you need access to the market, I decided it was better to form a group of companies to reduce the overhead, so that you're not crippling the country with the company with the G&A. So that was really how the gold group itself started, even though the main, Fortuna Silver Mines was the initial second company I started when Radius was there. Fortuna is now, $1.5 billion company, trades on New York. It's got mines in Africa and 3 Latin American countries. It's been a very successful company. We still share an office, but it's not part of the gold group anymore. It just got too big. So really the gold group started by me funding prospects that were brought to me by geos that I thought were capable, and I could house them in the office and reduce their overhead, and often would join the company as chairman. And then, sometimes the concepts work and sometimes they don't. So I would come up with other ideas for those companies, or, other countries to take a look at. That's how the concept began. Presently, Radius Gold is exploring in Mexico. It went to Guatemala after the success in Honduras. We also found a good gold deposit in Guatemala, the Cerro Blanco gold deposit, and sold that on. That's presently a Lundin mining deposit. It's trying to get permitted. I discovered it with the company in 1998, 1999, and grown to about a 3.5 million ounce gold deposit, but they're still struggling to permit it in Guatemala. It was owned for a long time by Goldcorp. The Lundin Group bought it from Goldcorp. So when Radius made that discovery and moved up to Mexico and started exploring in Mexico, we had a non-compete in Guatemala for some years. So we went to Mexico, and that's where Radius is focused at the moment. Radius is run by Bruce Smith, a geo that brought some ideas to me. Bruce has had some good successes within the gold group and without. He's been with me now for like 19, 20 years. And the company Radius has a couple of very good joint ventures in Mexico, one with Pan American Silver and one with Fresnillo. So 2 very good silver projects that have been advanced by majors. And it's got a couple of other projects it keeps 100%. So Radius is really like a project generator, except that we a bit of a twist on that model. Obviously, we're looking for that one project that we want to keep 100% of. Meanwhile, you get a project, you work it up, and then decide if it's going to be difficult, it's going to need a lot of investment or a little. So basically, based upon that decision, we then joint venture the project or advance it ourselves.
And that model, Simon, just give us your take on the prospect generator model in terms of, what Radius is trying to do there.
We haven't financed Radius since 2010, I think, maybe 2011. I mean, basically, we've had some good discoveries, but a lot of them have been smaller than the big success you're looking for. So, I found made discoveries and sold the project on to keep the company financed. We had a couple of good discoveries in Nicaragua that turned out to be smaller than I wished. We sold those to B2Gold. One of them's in production now. We sold another discovery in Guatemala that turned out to be about 1/4 to 1/2 million ounces. Sold that to Dan Kappas. So we've kept the company financed by making discoveries and making joint ventures and getting payments in from those joint ventures. But really, there's different ways to look at the project generator model. But the way I like to see it operate is you're looking for that one project you want to keep 100% of. and make a big win for the shareholders. I think there's
Right.
other people have a different way of approaching it, and some of them have been very, very successful, where they have multiple joint ventures, multiple royalties. They become royalty companies as well as joint ventures. But for me, I like discovery. So if you can put those big drill holes in yourself, that's what we're looking for in Radius and in Volcanic and in Rattler that just recently got financed to look back in the tombstones again. So I think Radius will continue doing what it's doing. Bruce is a great exploration geo. He's got a great team in Mexico, mostly locals. But we're looking for that one that we want to build up ourselves, have the company taken out.
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Is trying to carry the company capital intensive to do so, and then ultimately get enough behind it in terms of discovery, et cetera, to actually, result in some value for the shareholders, because it can be
Yeah, for
quite a
everybody.
struggle.
Yeah,
Plus you throw a,
it is. It's a challenging job. I'm not, as I said, there's a lot of luck and obviously a lot of hard work involved in exploration. I think I would say I've been very lucky. I've chosen countries where the competition, I'm kind of the first in. So in the early days of my career in the 80s and probably, through to the mid 90s, I picked countries where the low hanging fruit was still there. It's got a little more
yeah,
challenging these days. So,
yes,
we found gold deposits in Nicaragua, in Honduras, in Guatemala, silver deposit in Mexico, which helped to build Fortuna silver mines to what it is today. But it is certainly more challenging, and the politics have got way, way more difficult in many, many countries, even in North America. But I still
right.
enjoy the industry, and I like to work with people that thrive on exploration. So we would never really have a joint, the project generator model completely because the people that work with me and myself, we love discovery.
You throw in the political challenges that we've seen over the last few years, more so recently, and then you throw in a bear market with it, and even the difficulty with respect to getting a project permitted and developed in production, the challenges that you have as an operator and developer there. But also we've seen this spill over into just the exploration area, where even exploration success in these tough jurisdictions is being discounted. And that's one of the things that we've seen over the years here, is it's just getting difficult. Whether, there used to be kind of this thinking that, discovery, even in a tough jurisdiction, yes, you could get some value out of that, but it seems even more so discounted. I don't know if it's the bear market, Simon, or if it's just the difficulty of the jurisdiction, but what are your thoughts on just, trying to squeeze value out for shareholders at this point?
Yeah, no, it's definitely more challenging. Definitely more challenging. I mean, again, you can look at a company such as Snowline up in the Yukon that recently made a great discovery, and you can still get that bang for the buck by investing in juniors and that are doing good work. But yeah, kind of in the present market, sometimes you take a look at companies putting out good results, and it seems that just the good results all it does is create liquidity for people to sell the stock. When is that going to change? And that changes when you get into the bull market, which I do think that this year has got a good feeling about it. I don't really know about whether recessions drive the gold price higher or whatever, but I do think it feels that gold is going to break through 2000 and maybe higher than that, and which I think would create the bear market we've been waiting for some years.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
up to
definitely
the
in the
people
same
running
camp.
the companies to keep the companies financed, and whether it's a tough market or soft. I mean, like I said, Radius has not been back to the market to raise funds for 10 years now. And I think if you keep the G&A down and you can keep generating concepts that you can finance a company by selling the early stage discovery or that you don't think is going to be that big one, that's a way to keep the company financed also.
Right. It's a tightrope. I mean, the financing side, the awareness side, getting the word out there. You've seen companies that often trade less than cash just because of the discount that's applied for G&A expenses, and knowing that costs are going to continue to be on the books, and all of these things really play into so much of it. And I'm in the same camp as you are in terms of the gold price. Definitely, this is going north of 2000. You can question a little bit when, but I think it is fairly close. But yeah, we should have some good conditions here to start seeing some more excitement in the junior market, and more certain companies respected better over others, as you know. Why don't we skip over to volcanic gold mines? Why don't we cover that, and then I'm going to come back and close up with Rakla and then a few other questions. But talk about
Okay.
volcanic briefly and the projects there.
Yeah, so volcanics, I studied volcanic by, Radius worked in Guatemala for quite a while and we built up a very good land position there. So let me back to Cerro Blanco again. We discovered Cerro Blanco, sold it, and then we went back into the country. I don't know the year, but the politics changed in Guatemala. You just could not work there. I made a discovery and sold it to a mining guy, Dan Capas Cassidy. He put it in production at a small scale and Radius had a good royalty on it. But then the government shut down the mine, and it shut down, another mine, Escobal, a big silver mine too. So I couldn't justify spending more money in the country. So Radius refocused on Mexico. Years went by. We continued doing what we do in Mexico and made some good discoveries and some good joint ventures. But then about 2 years ago, no, more than that, actually 3.5 years ago, a new government came into Guatemala that was pro-mining. They wanted foreign investment. They wanted to get the mining industry back up and running again. So, I decided to get back into Guatemala again, but I didn't. Radius had some good properties in Mexico, and I didn't want to dilute the discoveries we had there by picking up this big land position in Guatemala again. So I financed a shell in my office with Volcanic. I raised 30 million for Volcanic to go back and take on Radius's projects in Guatemala. So we started working there about 3 years ago. Picked up we had an option on Radius. I think we had about 300,000 hectares under application. Some were granted. Some of the concessions, the Holly property and the Banderas property, were granted. Volcanic took an option on those properties with the first right on all the other ground that Radius had in the country. We made a good discovery on the Holly property. We put a bunch of holes in. I think to date we have about 400,000 ounces at 9 grams. And this is about 35 kilometers north of the Cerro Blanco gold deposit, which was being built by the Lundin Group, as I mentioned before. Unfortunately, they're having a very, very difficult time permitting the Cerro Blanco deposit. I think they will get there this year. I'm very optimistic. I've read some articles in the newspapers in Guatemala. They're finally realizing, as they need work. Yes, they need all those thousands of people that got laid off from the Escobal deposit to go back to work again. It's getting to the point where we'll see Cerro Blanco permitted. But the fact that the pro-mining government has failed to do that for the last 2 years really has had me slow down in Guatemala. The company's still well financed. It's got 6.5 million cash in the treasury. We've got that good discovery, 400,000 ounces at 9 grams, about 35, 40 kilometers north of the mine that's supposed to be built by now. And we have another good discovery further north in an area called the Motagua Norte Zone. We just found a belt this is different than the volcanic belt. This is an orogenic gold belt. There's a major structure cuts through the country. And we're finding a lot of free gold there. I've been working hard for a year and a half now to get those concessions granted. But the anti-mining government that was previously in Guatemala has made it very challenging to get concessions granted. You have to go through a whole process, almost equivalent to building a mine just to get an exploration concession. So really, until the Guapinol concessions are granted and I see Bluestone get into production, I've just reduced costs in Guatemala quite a bit. We're advancing the Holly property through the studies to get an exploitation license, and we're waiting for the concessions to the north where we have this new discovery to become granted. I'm optimistic that could happen in the last few months. Meanwhile, I've reduced expenditures. The stock's sitting quietly at 25 cents. So we have a market cap of just over 10 million and 6 million cash with those two discoveries. So I think if we start seeing Bluestone get its permit to build that mine, Volcanic is a great investment. For the moment, it's sitting quiet. It's been sitting at this price range for quite a while. I'm looking in other countries, but I'm so keen on what we have in Guatemala that I don't want to take it anywhere else until we get through another 3 to 6 months. And if we see some changes, then I think Volcanic has got a great shot.
I appreciate that, and we'll see what the Lundin Group can do over there with respect to Bluestone. And it's definitely been a challenge, and I know investors are pretty negative with respect to Guatemala, and I can see why, and quite a challenging environment outside of all the other countries we've discussed and more. As you look at the map there, Peru has a lot of challenges here. Ecuador seems to be shaping up a little bit better, and we've seen problems, of course, as you know, in Honduras, Nicaragua. Even now, Panama's in the news
Yeah.
with respect to Cobre de Panama and First Quantum, and some silliness there as well, which is sad for everybody.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. And I mean, I was talking to I was trying to get a news article written in Guatemala about what happens to it. I mean, people talk about Escobal, the amazing discovery. Actually, to be honest, a bit of story about that. I did find the vein. I didn't find the deposit though. I found the vein way back when in Mar West and sold the company when I made the discovery in Honduras. But anyway, bottom line is Escobal is a huge silver deposit, 350, 400 million ounces in Guatemala, was put into production, employed kind of 1,000 people. And then the government shuts the mine down. But just imagine the life of those 1,000 people that are working there. I mean, they finally got a full-time job. They start building their own house. They take a mortgage. They put the kids in school, and then the mine gets shut down 3 years ago. So all those people, individuals, going bankrupt. Kids go back to peasant living again from having a regular job. I mean, it's brutal what these governments can do to the populations of their own countries. It's very sad.
yes, there's not a lot of stuff in line as replacement work in these areas. So the industry, it's a critical industry, as it is everywhere. And as we continue to go through the issues with respect to energy globally, and things like climate change, et cetera, puts the focus right back on metals and mining and how important metals and mining is to everything in economies and into human advancement. It's just absolutely the backbone of everything. The devices we're chatting on, the infrastructure, everything is tied to metals and mining.
European countries like Sweden and Finland and Norway, the left-wing groups in those areas financing this anti-mining sentiment in these small countries like Central America. I just
Yes.
don't know if they understand the damage they're doing to people's lives there when they put money into these groups.
And let's put them in a shack and let's let them experience what they forgot as they continue
Yeah,
to, I guess,
what
go
they
up the
put out
food
there, they
chain and
drive around
become,
in there. Yeah,
they become very comfortable, and then they forget, or they never experience, depending on who you're talking about, what it's like to be in that situation. And I can tell you there's a huge divergence with respect to the perspectives on this issue and the opinions. But definitely, it's clear you and I could talk all day about that one and how
yeah.
terrible it is. Maybe before we get to Rackla here, let me ask you this. You've been in the sector a long time. Is there any other people that you found to be very successful, enjoyed working with, that are still in the sector, that still have the hungry motivation to succeed and create value for shareholders? Are there anybody else out there, Simon, that you think our audience should pay attention to?
I'd have to give it a bit of thought, but I think there's a lot actually. I sat in a panel a few days ago, and it was a panel on the Tombstone Belt in which where Rackler is working right now. So I'll lead into Rackler with this, but so I sat on a panel with guys like the Scott Burdell. I mean, he's a GO from the Yukon. I've known his father for a long time. He was a Yukon. His father still is a Yukon prospector. Scott grew up prospecting at a very young age, and then went to university, became a geologist. He's very driven. They've got an amazing discovery up in Yukon. They probably staked and prospected 10% of that whole territory over the 30 or 40 years of knowing the father. But you know, but I sat on a panel with 3 or 4 young people like Scott who were just driven to make discovery. They're just so I think there's a lot. I think there is the Vancouver Exchange has changed a lot of the TSX. I'm sorry, as it was now. It used to be the Vancouver Exchange, and there was I think a significant percentage of the companies that are run on the TSX now are driven to be successful. A lot more than was the case 20 years ago. I don't think there's that many people that make them lifestyle companies anymore. There's a lot of good people out there. I don't want to name any because I'm not that tuned into it. I focus on my own companies mostly, but there's some. Do you research on management? And it's
Yeah.
not that hard to look to pick the good ones.
Well, Simon, I bring that up because had a prior discussion with Rick Clark, and Rick Clark, I think, provided on that discussion, if I recall, provided you as a good friend and a person to follow in the sector. And any thoughts on Mr. Rick Clark?
Yeah, no, Rick's a great guy. He's had some amazing discoveries over the last 10 or 20 years. When I first came down from Yukon and wanted to get my first company public. Rick was a lawyer at Bull as a Tupper, and he took on, I didn't have the money to pay the lawyer to write the prospectus. He took it on and was going to get paid if I was successful getting the company listed. So I've nothing but good to say about Rick. His present company, Montage, is doing an amazing job in West Africa. I think that's going to be a very successful company. I think he'll have another great sale. I mean, Rick sold Redback for some $7 billion, and he just recently had a great discovery in the Sudan. No,
Yep.
wonderful man.
What do you think as you progress in your career? Because you've been here for quite a while. You've been in the junior sector for a long time. You've made discoveries. You've probably benefited quite well off of those over the years. As you get older and you start to see that experience show through, and you start to put that into the companies that you're running today, how does that compare with respect to a younger Simon out there motivated to go and do things in the sector? Do you have that same drive now, Simon? Is there more of a comfortable position in terms of what you're doing with these companies, or what are your thoughts as you progress through the cycle of your position and being in the sector for so long?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly more comfortable, and the drive is still there to make discovery, but I'm trying to put that drive onto the geos that I work with, right, or that I employ. I've just bought a new VPX into Rackler. Scott Castleman is his name. He seems to be driven for discovery. Bruce Smith, that works with me in Radius, the president of Radius, again, excellent. Very motivated, just wants to discover. So I think I try to pass that down to the people. Not pass it down, but I try to employ people below me that have got that drive that I used to have. I still love being in the field, and I still love to do the research which led to the ground that Rackler's got up in the Yukon. I mean, sometimes I have a reasonable nose, I think, for coming up with concepts that seem to pay off. But the people that I employ, I like to see the same in them, right? They're generating ideas all the time, like Bruce is in Radius in Mexico. All the time doing that research and getting into the field and prospecting it and seeing if his ideas bear fruit.
Very well. The wisdom transfer, experience transfer down the line is really important. And I think a lot of the times folks don't necessarily do that, and it should be done more. And it's important to try to move that wisdom down to people that you think are capable of taking that on and bringing things forward as we transition out and retire from the business. I think it's important to keep that talent, keep it
Yeah.
moving ahead. That needs to happen a lot more. How about just Rackla? You mentioned that briefly. Why don't you just talk briefly about Rackla and the work in the Yukon and Northwest Territories? Talk about that one for a moment.
Basically, Rackler, I was down at a conference with Rick Rule's conference in Boca Raton sometime last fall, or last summer, probably July, I think it was. And I met a Radius shareholder. We went for lunch, and he mentioned he had an investment in a company called Snowline, and the stock had gone way up, and he sold it thinking it would ease off a little bit, but it just kept going up, and he was sorry it sold. And I really hadn't heard much about Snowline until that point. So when I got back to my room, I took a look at it, and it got a discovery in these Tombstone Sweet intrusives. There's a belt of rocks that cuts through the intrusive rocks that cuts through from Alaska all the way to the eastern edge of the Yukon Territory, called the Tombstone Sweet intrusive. They can host some very, very large gold deposits. The gold deposits are sheeted vein systems within the intrusive body itself or in the adjacent sedimentary rocks that surround it. When I took a look at Snowline's discovery and where it was, way over in the eastern side of the Yukon, I decided to do a bit of research. I knew the belt well because my first company was called Tombstone because it was in the same suite of rocks, but on the western side of the Yukon Territory. There was some belief, and in the geological papers that were written, that as the belt transitioned over to the eastern side of the territory, it became more tungsten rich and gold poor. But obviously, this discovery that was made by Snowline was showing that wasn't always the case. This was in the eastern Yukon. So I pulled up the geological maps and using my knowledge and online, and I saw that the belt of rocks, I knew it transferred it into the Northwest Territories. And the Yukon Territory is challenging to stake ground in certain areas right now because a lot of it's restricted because of First Nations land claims and other complications. So I began looking at the Northwest Territories, and the same suite of rocks were there. And as I did some research, there were some prospects that had been worked on by Newmont and a couple of other companies, and they had some very very good geochemical signatures. These tombstone sweet intrusives are gold, bismuth, telluride, so they have a particular geochemical signature in the stream sediments and the soil samples. So I began to research the work that had been done by these companies, and they seem to have focused specifically on the sedimentary rocks that surround these intrusives, and they were looking for a different model. They were looking for the Carlin style sediment-hosted gold deposits. But the geochemistry of the results they got told me that these were intrusive hosted prospects. And they spent a lot of money and a lot of time generating data, but then not following it up until the target that was identified by that data. So I was able to go into the territory and I called Bruce and said, Bruce, we got a job to do. So we flew up into the Yukon and we went staking. And I hadn't been back there for sort of 15 years. So I'd love to be back in those mountains again. It's actually a gorgeous country. And we picked up some ground that had previously been worked by Newmont that has got a very, very exciting target on it. The project was now owned by a project generator royalty company called Orogen Royalties. So I made a deal with Orogen to pick up this ground that Newmont had worked previously in 2017, 2018, and staked some ground around that, and then made some other joint ventures with a couple of other juniors that had got ground in that, just on the border or across the border in the NWT. And we picked up, a great land position with a very exciting target, the Astro target. We'll be up there and drilling it in when the snow is gone in June this year. Take a look at Snowline, and there's a number of other companies with discoveries in the Yukon in this same tombstone belt. Banyan Resources is one. I think Banyan presently up to 4 million ounces. I think the Snowline discovery will get, personally, I think it's going to be between 5 and 10 million ounces. This is just my prediction. They're certainly not there yet, but they've had some fantastic holes. So this belt is proving to be very prospective, and I've got some very good prospects within the belt in the Northwest Territories. So I'm quite excited about that play. And Scott Castleman is just coming as the VPX. He's worked in the Yukon for the last, probably off and on for the last 20 to 30 years. But the last 7 years has been head of the Geological Survey of the Yukon. He wanted a job so he could be at home for a while his kids were home. Now they've all gone off to university. He wants to get back in the field again. So he's just joined me as the VPX of the company. Yeah, I'm excited. It'll be a good summer, I think. A good exploration project anyway. Very exciting. 4 million cash and about 52 million shares out.
Appreciate the overview on that and encourage the audience. Again, we just touched just briefly on these companies, but encourage the audience to look those up and do some of their own due diligence on looking at these here. And I'm sure you have an opinion on it because you've seen this develop over the years. And I think good stewards of these projects and environment have always done a nice job with respect to corporate social responsibility and things like community efforts and so forth, government efforts as well. Talk about your view, community efforts in general, and then also just talk about the importance of this for you. And then, of course, your overall view of CSR, or maybe you use the new term now, ESG.
Yeah, ESG. Well, my daughter's just joining me in working for the companies and studying in ESG. It's obviously very important, but it's always been important to me. In all those years of working in Central America and early on before that in Venezuela, I mean, trying to create employment in these parts of the world where there isn't any has always been part of the drive. It was, I'm driven for exploration for sure. I love the exploration industry, but the fact that I could generate the kind of employment I have in these towns where the people haven't never had a job in their lives was always a big part of the drive for me after I realized the changes I could make. San Martin deposit I found the San Martin gold mine in Honduras. It was put into production by Glamis. It was in production for 9 or 10 years. I watched the changes in the small towns around there. I watched the drilling companies come in and train people in those towns how to drill, and then they're working in other countries for the same drilling companies later on. It's always been important to me to try to generate as much work as you can in those local towns, rather than employing a D8, get 20 people trying to clear the road off instead of using helicopters, use mules and getting the people that have those animals generate employment there. It's a big part of the industry, I think, and that's why these countries need that work. They're just undeveloped. it'd be amazing how poor some parts. I'm sure you know, you're living in Panama, but how poor some parts of these countries, even small countries like Central America, how life can change within 50 kilometers from the cities, where people are just basically subsistence living, right? They eat what they grow, and that's it. The importance of being able to generate employment in those areas and see people get trained and then go to work internationally was very pleasing. It's always been a big part of it.
I like your insights on this. And, yeah, anybody who's going to have a strong opinion one way or the other with respect to communities and societies and things like climate change and all this other energy really should parachute themselves into a village and really get to understand about the world outside of their own little bubble in some well built city. Certainly worth having a full perspective, Simon. And this line of business is one of those that provides people with the opportunity to really get that global perspective and not just have really a limited view and experience from their armchair. Appreciate that, and certainly it's an interesting area, and it's going to continue to be a very important thing going forward. I think people have to be careful with the weaponization of ESG. Outside of that, being a good steward is something that we've already been doing, and we don't need necessarily, for the people who know this and have operated well in this regard, don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, if you know what I mean.
No,
So,
no.
you've been in here for quite a while in the sector. You've accomplished a lot already. In the years ahead here, before you exit the sector, what would you like to accomplish to finish up?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess getting some people working with me that take on what I do. This to keep the goal group going with people that do the same thing and have the same motivation that I have. That would be a good feeling. Making a discovery back up in the tombstones again would also be feel like going full circle somehow. I'm very happy to be back up there working. And I would like to see the projects I have in Guatemala going into production. The discoveries I've made there. The Cerro Blanco is now a 4 or 5, it's probably got a 10, 15 million, 15-year mine life if the Lundins get it in production. It'll change that whole area of the country. Yeah. And I mean, retirement is something I don't really think of a lot of. I think I'd let step back, have people take over the gold group and step back a little bit, but to grub stake people with ideas. And so that would be quite satisfying. Just do it on a smaller basis. Don't have an office. Just grub stake people with ideas and see them be successful.
Well, to wrap up here for potential investors who are listening in, you've got three of these companies within the group: Radius with about a 17 million market capitalization, Volcanic with a 10 million, and Rakla at 14 million, all Canadian dollars, of course. What would you say to potential investors who are listening in about considering the group and the companies?
I think for me at the moment, the most exciting one is Racklet because I just picked up this ground in a territory that I love, in rocks that I love working in. And I think if it's elephant country, so if we make a discovery, it will be very significant. But Volcanic is sitting there well financed with the discovery made that's not built into its market cap at all. One that's been made, the Holly, yes, it's only 400,000 ounces, but it's very high grade and it's very close to a mine that would love to take it on. And we have a second discovery in Volcanic up in that Motagua Norte belt where we have, 20 kilometers of rocks with a lot of visible gold in that we really don't understand the genesis of yet because we haven't been able to trench or drill it at this point. And Radius is stable. As I said, we haven't been to the market to finance Radius in over 10 years. So, we've got two majors advancing projects for us and we're still generating ideas there. So, they're all high risk doing what we do, exploring, trying to make that discovery to get the company sold to a major.
And Simon, the best way for investors to reach out to Gold Group Management?
Contact me, Simon Ridgway, by email at the office 604-801-5432. Or you can talk to Adam Buchanan, who's a VP co-development of the three companies at that same number.
Well, Simon, thanks for taking the time with us here. Best of luck at the companies, and we'll look forward to having you back on sometime in the future.
Andrew, it was great talking to you. Thanks for the invite.